What's going on, guys? My name's Spence.
And I'm Mitch.
And we're two brothers that really love King of the Hill, and we're reviewing every single episode in the series. And today we have the first Peggy-centric episode, Square Peg, where we get to learn a lot about Hank's wife and the role she plays in the Hill family. So what do you think about Peggy as a character, personally?
For me, Peggy, I was indifferent to Peggy in my first run through the show when I was a kid, watching it every Sunday when it came out. But now as a grown man, I found that I ended up marrying a bit of a Peggy. And my wife is, she doesn't like for me to call her out on when she's a Peggy, but she's a bit of a Peggy.
Yeah, and that's interesting because when you mentioned that, I'm like, holy crap, that's true. But she's actually, I would say, the only kind of Peggy archetype that I know in my life, because our mom is not like Peggy at all. While our dad is very much a Hank archetype, our mom is a lot more like a Marge.
She's a Marge.
Yeah, she's a Marge. Sure. So yeah, she is not a Peggy at all. So yeah, I always, on a personal level, I was always alienated from her because I never really related to her. Didn't really know anybody like her. And honestly, over the years, I haven't really grown much on her. But I think for Hank, honestly, they make a great team. And that's one of the things I've thought always about the show, is that Peggy and Hank, despite their differences, are actually, I think, a pretty compatible couple and do a great job driving the show together. I don't feel like Peggy is really a foil to Hank in any type of way, like we were talking about with a lot of the other characters.
No, but Peggy and Hank are on the same team.
Yeah, and that's another thing I like about. When we go back to The Simpsons, right? You feel a lot of the time that Marge and Homer are not on the same team. Plus, it's Homer, it does so much crazy shit. A lot of the time, it's like, why are you still...
Peter and Lois are never on the same team.
With a guy like Hank, you understand why they're together, and you never really ask, it's like, why is Hank still married to Peggy? Why is Peggy still married to Hank? I think that's cool, definitely, for a couple in a cartoon series. And it's similar, actually, because Greg Daniels also does Bob's Burgers, right? One of our favorite television shows. And I get a similar feeling between Linda and Bob.
And Linda, right? Yeah.
That they are a really compatible couple. They're almost always on the same team, with a couple of exceptions. Anyway, so back to the episode itself. We start off the episode by learning that Bobby's school is starting to teach the kids sex ed. And what grade is Bobby in again? 5 or 6?
He's 13. I think he turns 13 in during the season.
Yeah, during
he starts
the season,
off as 12. Middle school, we know for sure.
Yeah, so they start teaching sex ed, and he brings home a permission slip, but both the parents have to sign. And both the parents, both Hank and Peggy, say, nope, no way. He's too young, he can't go, he can't take the class at school. And this leads to them deciding they're just going to have the talk, the sex talk or whatever, right there, right now. Which I thought was like weird. You don't have to have the talk literally right now, guys, but whatever. So Peggy goes to try and talk to Bobby, and she can't do it. She's too repressed. She's full of shame. She can't start talking about male genitalia or anything like that with Bobby, and she just can't do it. And Hank's the same way. He can't do it either. He just can't bring himself to talk to Bobby about this, so they try and take the permission slip and put it back together. They learn quickly that some mysterious, some harmless conspiracy nut, some harmless nut job, some harmless nut job has phoned the school and threatened the current sex ed teacher to withdraw, not teach the class. And she does, and this leads to Peggy being tossed the torch to teach the sex ed class. And I think it's a great introduction to Peggy and her personality. And right now, in this episode, she doesn't work against Hank so much as a personal foil, or she's personally against him. She is trying to do her job, which is to teach whatever subject she needs to. And Hank is struggling with that fact, right? He's struggling with his wife teaching the subject matter, teaching the sensitive subject matter. The one thing, even though Peggy isn't my favorite character, I admire her want to tackle this difficult subject and her stepping up to the plate and doing something that's so outside her comfort zone. But I personally really like this episode, not just because I think it does a great job introducing Hank's wife, but because it's a timeless subject that we still struggle with today. We still struggle with what is the right time to talk to our children about.
Are we allowed to talk about?
Yeah, what are we allowed to talk about? It's still a fucking mess. And it's still super awkward. And that's part of the reason why this episode, I think, resonates with me. Because, I have kids and I think about when is the time I'm going to have to start thinking about, talking about this. Thankfully, they're young, so it's not anywhere soon.
It shows you that you have to do it. At some point, you have to do it.
And yeah, that's the thing. I think it also really emphasized, this episode really emphasized, telling them too early is going to fuck them up. But if you wait too long, that's also going to fuck them up. And we see that with the way, particularly a lot of the women are repressed in this episode. Like, Hank is obviously repressed, but like Peggy is super repressed. And then when she talks to all the other women at the fucking soccer, what it was, soccer, baseball, whatever fucking sport it was, you could tell all those women are super repressed about the subject too.
When my husband would crawl all over me at night and do his business, well, I would just close my eyes and think of them pretty flowers. Oh, Bonnie, you poor, poor woman.
Anyway, this episode also introduces one of my personal favorite characters, Dooley, who almost never fails to make me laugh. His deadpan delivery.
The king of the one-liner.
Your dad lost his job.
But we can see that things are getting more awkward for Bobby as other kids are picking on him, for his mom having to do the sex ed course, and it's messing with Hank. And it's messing with Bobby.
I just realized that it's the male sex organ and it folds out.
Yeah,
like 3 pages.
Yeah, I know. That must be a big organ. Yeah. But yeah, Hank is uncomfortable with Peggy learning the subject. And now there's this scene where she asks him to put lotion on his elbows before they have sex. And Hank gets super weirded out by his request. And he's worried that all the guys are making fun of him behind his back. And I guess they are. That's definitely not cool, I think, for the guys.
Yeah.
That's how dudes are, right? You always know, in some of my the funniest lines of the show are when the guys are ripping on each other.
They really nailed that on the head about male relationships.
All the guys ripping on each other all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on how it can really affect you, right? And how, them ripping on Hank is affecting him in his personal life, and he's dwelling on it and shit like that.
How much you care about what they think.
Care.
Yeah.
There's a great scene here where Peggy's trying to say all the naughty words, trying to learn how to trying to get over herself and say penis and vagina. And I remember listening to, it was an interview with the voice actor who voices Peggy, and she was like, man, I knew I was in the right job when on the second day I was screaming vagina at the top of my lungs. But yeah, this causes Hank basically to storm in there and say, you know what, Bobby can't take the class. I'm forbidding him from taking the class. And he takes him to work instead. But while they're at work, Bobby just keeps asking questions anyway, because he's curious. He wants to know what mom is teaching everybody in the class.
What's mom saying to all those guys?
Hank just can't get over it. He can't answer Bobby's questions as they get more and more inappropriate and personal. And then I think the real breaking point here, and I think it's an intelligent thing to note, when Bobby says, don't worry, Dad, I won't have sex anymore. And that Hank's like, no, that's not what I want. But you can't blame Bobby for getting that impression, right? From him and from his parents, that they never want him to have sex at all. But that's not what you want, right? You don't
unless it's your daughter.
And that really breaks Hank out of his bubble. I think he realizes what he's doing, and realizing that Bobby is going to need to learn from someone, somewhere. And he's just not the guy who can do it. He just doesn't have the right skill set. He doesn't have the right tools in the toolbox. And I think it underlines a great, whatever you want to say, a paradox within Hank, that he wants to be the best father he can be for his son, but he struggles with the repression and talking about difficult and sensitive subject matter. But ultimately he overcomes it, or at least he finds a way to overcome it.
We really get a taste of that in Aisle 8, the episode Aisle 8A.
That's a classic one. I think they actually won an award for that one. I think that might be one of the few ones that they won an award on. But I'll have to double check that. So eventually Hank sends Bobby to the class, and it ends up being that Bobby's the only one who has permission. Anyway, So Peggy ends up teaching him everything she knows, and only him, none of the other kids. And they actually managed to get through it okay. But I don't know about you, but for me personally, just because this episode hits home for me on a lot of levels, and I think it does a really good job in balancing like humor and insight with sensitive topics. And this is something that the show, I think, continually does well throughout the series, which is balance these very sensitive topics while also giving you some interesting ways to think about the material at hand.
No one else has ever done that quite like a King of the Hill.
And especially in such a down-to-earth way. Like, I know you're not as big a South Park fan as I am, but I'm a big fan of South Park, and they are a lot smarter than people give them credit for, and they have a lot of values that they want to communicate in the show, but it's nowhere near as grounded as King of the Hill, right? King of the Hill is grounded down to earth. South Park is fucking out there. It's completely abstract and detached from a lot of what's happening. I give this one a 9 out of 10, personally. Like I said, it's a really great episode. It touches home for me on a lot of levels, and I think it does a great job introducing Peggy as Hank's wife, and Peggy as her own person with her own ambitions and her own goals, and sometimes those come into conflict with Hank, but ultimately they're still a couple on the same team.
And that happens with modern couples nowadays because most couples both are working partners. Mm-hmm. And it's important to support your partner's career just as much as your own.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's a good point, because especially for the time, right, a lot of the sitcoms, mom was a stay-at-home mom, right? Mm-hmm. And mom didn't work, and Peggy, she was part-time substitute teacher. Although we don't know exactly how much she ends up working, but she works because she wants to. She likes to work, right? She wants to be out there teaching. She wants to be doing something with her life. So yeah, overall, what would you give it out of 10?
I would give that one an 8.5.
Okay, 8.5. And personally, my funniest moment again is Dale trying to intimidate Peggy.
You don't know who I am, but I know where you live, sex ed teacher, and you better cut it out if you know what's good for you. Oh, and Hank, we changed that tee-off time to 3 o'clock. See ya.